What is up, YouTube? I'm Devon DaVinci, leader of the Renaissance Crew, and you're watching DaVinci Reacts. Recently, I just got done with an oversimplified World War II reaction. If you want to go ahead and watch that, I'll have a card somewhere in the top corner of the video that will allow you to check that out. And some people recommended that I check out this video. It's called The Fallen of World War II. From what I heard, it sounds like it goes over like a visual statistic or a visual stat sheet of like different facts about World War II. I'm guessing since it's called The Fallen, it probably covers more so the deaths and the death toll and death counts and things like that. This video was uploaded by Neil Halloran. Now, it's possible that this could have been uploaded by somebody else and this is a re-upload. I'm not sure, but if it is, someone give me an update for the actual channel and I will go ahead and direct you to it. But if this is the original, then you know, it's not really a big deal. I will go ahead and keep the person that uploaded inside this video. So I will have a link to Neil's channel at the end of this video that you can click on and watch, or go to their channel, watch all their stuff, subscribe, like, things like that, as well as having a link in the description box down below that you can click on. And like I said, I always recommend you watch those videos before you watch this reaction. That way you can give the original content creator a view and it can continue to make content that we all enjoy. Now, let's go ahead and get into this and see what it has to offer. I do know World War II is the most deadly war in American history. Yeah, I mean, mainly just the Soviets and the Germans alone pretty much added so much to that damn death toll that it's crazy. Let's go ahead and check this out.
The average lifespan of an American is 80 years. And an 80-year-old today was 10 when World War II ended, 4 when it began. A soldier who saw battle would have to be in his late 80s, at least today. Generals, political leaders, the decision makers of the war, few are still with us. And over the past few decades, we've seen authors and filmmakers rush to capture stories from survivors before this connection of memory is lost. This project is not about individual
I'm guessing this
war
is all the
stories,
people that died.
and it's not
Wow.
about survivors. We're going to tally up the tens of millions of
It
people
looks like that
whose
scene
lives were
from
cut short by the war,
that Jet Li movie when all the
and
arrows
see
were
how
coming
these
at him.
numbers stack up to other wars in history, including trends in recent conflicts. We'll be counting soldiers and civilians separately. Each of these figures represents 1,000 people who died. Civilians were of all walks of life, whereas military deaths were almost entirely men. The average age was about 23.
An entire
In most
generation
battles,
of people.
for every 1,000 soldiers killed, there were more than 1,000 who were injured. The word casualty can be confusing because in military speak, it often includes both deaths and injuries, and anything else that takes a soldier out of service. Here, we're just counting the deaths, and we'll begin with American soldiers.
There was some people that recommended that I check out another reactor. He's Arthur Ray, I believe his name was, something like that. He's an Estonian, and I remember I went and checked out his World War II reaction to the oversimplified thing, and he's a great channel because he, like I said, is from Eastern Europe. He is from a country that was occupied by the Soviet Union and the Nazis as well. So it's really interesting getting his take on the historical events at the time. I wish there was more reactors that reacted to stuff that they have experience in. Like I would love to see like a historian react to oversimplified, or a German react to oversimplified. Somebody from Russia. Like I would love to see more people that have connections with the content that they're reacting to react to stuff. So let that be my quick shout out of the day. So Arthur, if you're watching this video, I'm not sure if you are or not, but I will be looking at more of your stuff, and I can't wait to see what content you have in the future. Oh yeah, another thing. Next, I will be watching Oversimplified Hitler, so that'll be the next one. Let's get back into it. Yeah, some countries lost an entire generation of people. I wouldn't be surprised if like some Eastern European countries
over 400,000 died.
Hold on, just a real quick. I'm gonna go back and let them explain that again. I wouldn't be surprised if some Eastern European countries, like the ratio of men to women has been like drastically shifted because of this war alone. It would not surprise me if there was countries out there with way more women than men, simply because of the death toll that it had on that generation of young men.
Over 400,000 died. Most of the deaths occurred in the European theater, fighting the Nazis. And about a quarter were in the Pacific, fighting the Japanese. When you put them on the timeline, you see that casualties were the heaviest at the end of the war. The war began on September 1st, 1939.
We kind of came in late.
But the U.S. wasn't willing to join the fight until Pearl Harbor, 2 years in. The deaths increased drastically on D-Day, when the Allies invaded Normandy.
Yeah.
One of the most tragic moments of the war was on D-Day at Omaha Beach, where 2,500 Americans fell. So about the same number of U.S. soldiers died on this single beach landing as the entire 13 years of the recent war in Afghanistan. The bloodiest battle in the Pacific was Okinawa, which lasted 82 days, during which 12,500 Americans died. About 5,000 of these deaths were at sea from kamikaze attacks. Now let's look at some other countries, starting with Europe. Germany started World War II when it invaded Poland. Poland ultimately lost 200,000 soldiers in the war. Most died after the invasion while the country was occupied by Germany and the Soviet Union. Germany, meanwhile, lost just 16,000 in the invasion of Poland. The Nazis went on to invade and conquer other countries, including Denmark, Belgium, the Netherlands, France, Greece, and Yugoslavia. France surrendered, but after losing 92,000 soldiers in the Battle of France. Over 200,000 ultimately fell, which includes deaths in POW camps, French colonies, and other fighting. Yugoslavia suffered almost 500,000 military deaths. The initial invasion brought relatively few casualties on both sides, but the deaths mounted under Nazi occupation due to guerrilla fighting, civil conflict, and mass executions. The Nazi invasions were swift, with relatively few German losses. Even the Nazi commanders expressed surprise at their success. And then we have the United Kingdom and the United States, who were not invaded but took the fight to the Nazis. Britain lost about the same number of soldiers as the US, which includes the British colonies. Germany lost about 500,000 soldiers fighting the US and Britain in what is known as the Western Front, which took place in France and Belgium.
So if you take out the deaths that they already had from the invasions of the other European countries, they all lost about relatively the same amount of people.
But most Nazi soldiers died in the Eastern Front, Germany's unsuccessful invasion of the Soviet Union. The numbers are staggering. The most famous battle of the Eastern Front, and perhaps the turning point of the European war, was Stalingrad. The German Sixth Army successfully took Stalingrad, but then got surrounded by the Soviets and cut off from food and ammunition. 500,000 Nazis would ultimately die in Stalingrad.
Like I said, if you haven't checked it out, there's a video that goes over a diary that a Nazi soldier was writing as they were getting ready to invade Stalingrad. And it's amazing reading it because going into it, the first entries are like really about overconfidence and how, one second, let me get my time up. Or a lot like very much overconfident in how they were going to, take care of Stalingrad and be back in time for I think Christmas was later. I don't know if they were saying be back in time for Christmas. I know they were at one point because it had lasted too long, but yeah, they thought that they would be done quick, and it's crazy how the tone of the entries change as time goes on. I'm gonna try to look it up, and if I can find it, I'll leave a link in the description box. But it's crazy to like sit there and listen to the entries.
Another 100,000 were taken prisoner, of which 6,000 would ever return. POWs had a low survival rate throughout World War II, and it was particularly grim in the East. When you include these POWs, roughly the same number of Germans died in Stalingrad as all the Western Front fighting against France, the UK, and the US. And though Stalingrad was a victory for the Soviets, they suffered almost twice as many losses as Germany. The Soviet Union would eventually defeat the once unstoppable German army, killing 2.3 million Nazi soldiers. But winning the war came at a cost.
This is probably the prime reason why Russia, despite how big the country is only like 1/3 the population of the United States. If this war hadn't have happened, Russia would probably have, hundreds of millions of people living in the country right now. Then again, I think World War II kind of laid down a foundation for the Soviet Union and the United States to become the only superpowers on the planet.
8.7 million is the official tally by the Russian military, a hotly disputed number. Some studies have calculated as many as 14 million dead. To complete the count of European military deaths, we need to add German deaths from other fronts, including the North and Africa, as well as deaths from other Axis powers allied with the Nazis: Hungary, Romania, and Italy. When you put these European military deaths on the timeline, it looks like this. You can now interact with the chart to learn more. Pause the narration if you would like more time.
Okay, so you have to visit that website to look at the interactive version.
And now we switch to civilian deaths in Europe.
Usually civilian deaths are always higher than the
6
soldier
million
death.
Jewish people were killed in the Holocaust. If you separate this by country, you see that about half, 2.7 million, were Polish. 700,000 were Soviets, followed by Hungary and 17 other countries. Broken down another way, about half of the 6 million were killed in the concentration camps. Over 1 million died in Auschwitz. Most were killed in the gas chambers. Others died from starvation, exhaustion, disease, and other forms of execution. The second most deadly camp was Treblinka, which was exclusively an extermination camp, set up to look like a train station. Mobile killing groups killed 1.4 million Jews. Like with the gas chambers, men were killed first to reduce the risk of revolt.
It's crazy how a soldier can go through with some of these things despite, I'm sure if you brainwash somebody enough, they'll do just about anything for you and think that what they're doing is right. But it's crazy how many people follow through with orders without stopping to think whether or not it's ethical or if it conflicts with their own moral compass. Oh man, it's crazy.
The Holocaust also includes non-Jewish deaths. Between 130,000 to 500,000 Roma, then called Gypsies, were killed. The numbers are disputed.
I never heard the term Roma before.
About 250,000 people with disabilities were killed. Homosexuals, Catholics, and other groups were also exterminated, but their numbers were relatively small. Some historians say that other civilian deaths should go under the label of Holocaust, about 2 million non-Jewish Poles were killed under German occupation, some of which were sent to the gas chambers at Auschwitz. When you combine civilian and military deaths, over 16% of the total Polish population died in World War II, which is the highest percentage of any country. But not the highest in total death count. The Soviet Union again tops that list, losing at least as many civilians as it did soldiers, somewhere between 10 and 20 million. A particularly dark moment for the Soviet Union was the Siege of Leningrad, now St. Petersburg. German forces surrounded Leningrad before civilians could be evacuated. Supplies, including food, were cut off for 2.5 years. 1.5 million people died as a result, mostly from starvation, mostly civilians. Stalin's cruelty towards his own people is partly responsible for these numbers. He often didn't allow civilians to evacuate from cities, thinking it would cause the soldiers protecting them to fight harder. About 1 million Soviets died in Stalin's own labor camps, called the Gulag. Just about every country suffered civilian losses, especially countries who were invaded. While many died as a result of so-called collateral damage, the biggest numbers occurred when it was no accident. Civilians were exterminated, purposely fired upon or bombed, used as human shields, or intentionally deprived of food. The intentional killing of civilians was done by most warring parties, including the United Kingdom and the United States. The United Kingdom was spared of a land invasion, but still lost 60,000 civilians, largely from German air raids or blitzes, often directed at civilian population centers. The UK did the same to German cities at a much greater magnitude, causing about 10 times the number of deaths. But most German civilian deaths came from the ground at the late stage of the war. When the Nazi regime collapsed, civilians living in occupied regions had to desperately flee from the advancing Soviet army. Rapes were widespread, and death estimates ranged from 600,000 to 3 million. Let's step back and see where we are with the totals. We just counted about 20 million civilian deaths in Europe.
Yeah, there was like 50 million deaths all
If you add this to the European military deaths we already
50 to
covered,
80 million, I think is the estimation.
It brings us to over 40 million. Then we have the Asian theater. Here we see the vast majority of military deaths in Asia came from China and Japan. On the civilian side, about 6 million deaths from China, Indonesia, Korea, Indochina, and the Philippines can be attributed to Japanese war crimes, which are sometimes compared to the Nazi atrocities due to the sheer scale of the cruelty. China had the second highest death count after the Soviet Union. And like the Soviets, the Chinese government demonstrated a stunning willingness to sacrifice its own people. Chinese nationalists opened the dike at the Yellow River, hoping the flood would halt the Japanese advance. 500,000 Chinese civilians or more were killed, which is 2 or 3 times the number who died in all countries in the 2004 Asian tsunamis. But the invasion of China only cost Japan 200,000 soldiers. Most were killed fighting the US and allies in the Pacific War. A significant portion of Japanese civilian deaths were caused by American firebombing and the 2 nuclear attacks. Contrary to official US statements, these airstrikes were directed at civilian populations, not military targets. When you add all the deaths outside Europe, it brings us to a grand total of 70 million for the war, give or take depending on who's counting and what civilian deaths get included. More people died in World War II than in any other war in history. For comparison, here are 20 or so of the very worst wars and atrocities we have on record. Some of these are more of atrocities than wars, but we've seen how that distinction can get blurry.
Yes, I'm going to have to go back and
some of these spanned across
look
centuries.
at all these specifically.
World War II had the highest body count, and it all happened in just 6 years. The world's population has grown significantly since the earliest atrocities on this list. If you want to compare them in terms of what percentage of the world died, we can adjust the chart to look like this. This rough approximation tells us there may have been more devastating wars before World War II, proportionally speaking.
Yeah. I did a video that I reacted to not too long ago called, I believe it was the 20 worst atrocities humanity has ever done. It was done by the infographic show. I'll leave a link for that in this video as well.
When we turn to post-war conflicts, it's hard to say anything that isn't controversial. But the data shows something quite extraordinary has been happening.
Less people have been dying in wars, at least for...
In 1989, John Gaddis coined the phrase the long peace to identify the absence of conflict between the nuclear powers during the Cold War. 25 years later, the Cold War is over, and the term is still being used, although its meaning may have shifted. European countries have not fought each other, except for this 10-day war in 1956 when the Soviet Union invaded Hungary. When we look at European wars before World War II, it looks like this. They tend to be more frequent as you go back, though smaller in scale.
That's because we got nuclear weapons now.
And the largest 44 economies of the world have not battled each other since World War II.
Yeah, that's because
rich countries have fought poorer countries, like the US versus Iraq. But rich countries have not fought other rich countries. Such a period of peace between the so-called great powers hasn't been seen since the Roman Empire. To many, peace is too strong of a word.
Yeah,
wars have occurred since World War II, and they can be grouped into these 4 categories. We don't see colonial wars anymore. We've already noted that interstate wars between rich countries have not occurred at all, and here we see wars involving smaller economies have tapered off. That leaves civil wars of 2 types, with and without foreign intervention. And this is what these battle deaths look like alongside of World War II. More people died fighting in World War II than in all the wars since. And again, we can't forget about world population, which has almost tripled since World War II. If we scale these numbers to show deaths in proportion to world population, showing the likelihood that a person on Earth dies in battle, the downward trend becomes even more pronounced. Now, this isn't to infer anything about why this trend is occurring. That's a discussion for another day. You can now interact with this chart to explore what conflicts are behind the totals. Now, bear in mind, we're just looking at battle deaths here, not civilian deaths, but those too are in decline.
Yeah, it's mainly because
Peace
of
is a difficult thing to measure.
the weapons we have are a little
It's
bit
a
more
bit like
precise.
counting the people who didn't die in wars that never happened.
And
we give such importance to the word peace, but we don't tend to notice it when it occurs.
the big countries don't fight
or
each other as
report on
much.
it. Sometimes it takes reminding ourselves of how terrible war once was to see the peace that has been growing around us. Of course, this trend may not continue, and it's not clear how looking at these charts can help us make the right decisions to ensure that it does. But the longer the long peace grows, the more significant it becomes. So if watching the news doesn't make us feel hopeful about where things are heading, watching the numbers might.
So it was credited to the right person. I just wanted to make sure of that. Okay, so there will be a link for Neil's channel at the end of this video that you can click on and go straight to his channel and watch his other videos. He doesn't have a lot. If you'd like to support
this project and encourage new episodes, please follow us using one of the options below. And consider paying the suggested ticket price for today's show. Thank you very much.
There we go. So, yeah, if you want to show your support, this is the way to do it. Like I said, I'll leave a link for this channel, and I'm sure, I knew they have a Patreon, so it would be great if you can go ahead and check out their Patreon. They only have like 3 videos, so I believe that they're really waiting for people to like show their support so they can continue this project on. So if you want to see more content, go and check out their Patreon. Like I said, there will be, I might leave a link for the actual Patreon in the description box as well, so you can go ahead and check it out and show your support for them. But yeah, just the idea of so many people dying in that one war. And I mean, like I said, because of the nuclear weapons and things like that, war is a little bit more risky now. Back in the day, like, you can fight someone, but then at the end of the day, both the countries didn't necessarily like disappear. Like back in the old days, like the medieval days and before, wars meant like annexing entire countries. So an entire country could just disappear from a war, and get raided and all the other stuff. But after that, I want to say right around the colonial, imperialistic period of history, um, wars pretty much just changed borders. Like, you get into a fight with someone, you don't take out the country, but you might take some territory that they own, so their borders would change over time. World War II was the first time that countries decided like they want to take over large portions of the world or just take over the world. It's almost like they took the mindset of the olden days with Alexander the Great and the Mongolians and the giant empires, and it's like Germany wanted to do something like that in the current age. So that's why it seems so like atrocious and things to us, because it's like, okay, well, you're not just fighting somebody over a disputed territory, you're trying to take over like an entire segment of the world. And we managed to beat that, and to this day we're still getting hit by the effects of World War II. I don't think there's been any war that's been more influential as far as like setting the way of life that we live as World War II. The Cold War, and we just got out of the Cold War. There might be another one starting up soon though, if it hasn't already started. Like just the entire like layout of Europe has been completely changed from World War II. You still have countries that are under the like watchful eye of the world powers because of World War II. Like Japan still doesn't necessarily have an army. I mean, they do have their group of like special forces and stuff, but they don't necessarily have an army. From what I've heard, people say that America pretty much fits the bill to help them out if something were to happen. But yeah, it's amazing and fascinating just how crazy the war was. But anyway, that's pretty much it. I'm gonna go ahead and move on. Like I said, if you want to check out their Patreon, the link will be in the description box, the original video as well, and the link for their channel will be in this video. If you like this video, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and share. I'm pushing against the clock, so I'm gonna go ahead and try to end this. But I'm Devon DaVinci. You've just been enlightened. So I'm gonna go ahead and do some more videos. Hopefully I'll see you there. Deuces.